Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part there for the 20th of June 2024. Before we get to the military aid and equipment video in the main, let me give a correction to what I said yesterday. I said that these JDAMs are the dumb munitions given a glide kit that allows them to become precision guided munitions. You drop them from a plane, they glide, and you can steer them somewhat, and they use GPS to hit a target. Okay. They've been jammed, and so the manufacturers have come up with a home-on jam kit. And I said that jams the jammer. So the bomb would then get to its desired destination, jamming the electronic warfare that itself is trying to jam the bomb's GPS. Actually, it's not what it is. It's more like turning the glide bomb into an anti-radiation missile. So as Simon Moorcroft says, home on jam or home on GPS jammer does not jam the jammer. Home on jam turns any weapon with that guidance option into an anti-radiation missile or bomb. A jammer, like a radar, is a radio frequency transmitter. In home on jam mode, the weapon literally flies directly at the specified selected jamming emitter, passively homing in on it until impact. Depending on the intelligence of the weapon, it may have to be launched in a pre-selected home on jam mode, or can actually make the decision to switch from its normal guidance mode to home on jam autonomously during flight when jamming overwhelms its primary guidance mode. So in other words, when you release this bomb, you've got your target, say, I don't know, maybe it's a building in Vovchansk, and you release it, and then as it's on track to that building, it senses that it's getting jammed by electronic warfare, and that will mean it would miss, and you wouldn't achieve your objective. And so it can potentially, I mean, he's saying either you have to do this beforehand, or there might be the capability so it autonomously switches on its own to take out the thing that is trying to jam it, and then your next bomb can take out the initial primary target. Either way, the JDAM ER, extended range JDAM, with a home on jam guidance option, is going to be a nasty surprise for Russian electronic warfare units. They will either suffer a lot of rapid attrition or choose to forego any jamming activities against Ukrainian Air Force airstrikes. This is really significant, actually. It's a very good adaptation in the kind of evolution of these measures and countermeasures. It's that the weapons race, the arms race that you have. You produce a weapon, it gets countermeasure. You produce a weapon with the countermeasure, then the countermeasures change, and so on and so forth. And you keep it's cat and mousing all the way. But thank you for Simon and many others who talked about that yesterday and corrected me. Thanks for that. Okay, Financial Times reports, and this is massively significant. So, okay, context. We heard yesterday that Switzerland were going to have their contract, their FMS, which is their basically military sales contract, for PAC-3 missiles. I think it was 72 of them, kicked into long weeds. They were due actually in 2027 anyway, or some time off in the distance. And people were saying, well, hang on, why are they delaying the contract with Switzerland? Surely you want to be replacing ones that are going to be much further up the list. And I said yesterday, because we had heard that the Americans had said that Ukraine were going to get the priority in Patriot weapons system production, right? So that those on the waiting list for them, those who put orders for them, and that one now presumes that's the missiles as well, made by two different companies. So the missiles are made by Lockheed Martin, the launchers are made by Raytheon or RTX. The idea is that everyone's going to be pushed down lists so that Ukraine gets priority and they get what they want. But there are no orders yet, as we can see. But I think the groundwork's been laid here. So the idea that the Swiss had officially been contacted with regard to having their weaponry or their orders deprioritized isn't just they're just going to select Switzerland. It's going to be all of them. all of them are going to be deprioritized. It's just we heard about Switzerland first. Well, that appears to be exactly what's happened. So, Financial Times, US to redirect Patriot air defense orders to Ukraine. Systems destined for other countries will be diverted to help Ukraine protect its cities and critical infrastructure. US government is set to halt all open orders for Patriot air defense systems and interceptor missiles until Ukraine has enough to defend itself from Russian air strikes. 3 people with knowledge of the decision said that the move would be announced on Thursday after President Joe Biden said last week in Italy that he had secured commitments for the delivery of additional air defense systems to Ukraine. These would include Patriot missile batteries, for which Kiev has been clamoring after Russia escalated missile and drone attacks on its power plants. Biden said 5 countries had agreed to send Patriot and other air defense systems to Ukraine, and that other countries expecting the delivery of US systems would have to wait because everything, quote, everything we have is going to go to Ukraine until their needs are met. That's so significant. Do not underestimate the significance of that statement. Everything we have is going to go to Ukraine until their needs are met. I wonder, first of all, I think that Joe Biden recognizes the importance. I mean, these people that say Joe Biden wants Ukrainians to die or whatever, and that's why he's delaying X, Y, and Z. Like I said, yes, and we are going to return to that. The F-16 pilot training, I don't think is the overall remit of Joe Biden, but he won't have known about the bottleneck. And I think now becoming knowledgeable about this, things are changing by all accounts. But with regard to Patriot systems, I mean, this is an example how it's too late. Like Biden should have done, the administration should have done this ages ago. Yes, we had a big 7-month issue of an impasse in Congress. But I think, especially given November 2024 and the possibility of Trump getting in, the US are going to be thinking, right, we've got to make sure everything happens now. Put those orders on the back burner. Let's get Ukraine everything it needs before Trump gets in and turns everything around. So anyway, standing beside Ukrainian President Zelensky after the two signed a 10-year defense pact on the sidelines at the G7 summit in Puglia, Biden added that Kyiv would begin receiving more systems relatively quickly. The US announcement on Thursday will codify Biden's commitment to Kyiv and ensure that Ukraine gets the Patriot systems it needs to protect its cities and critical infrastructures. 2 of the people with knowledge of the decision told the Financial Times. Now, whether this comes from the US or whether finances come from other countries or the EU to buy the stuff from the US, it's neither here nor there. This is way overdue, but Ukraine needed those systems, and they need the systems so that they can be on the offensive, not just to sit them around cities and protect their infrastructure, but also near the front lines, take out the Russian airframes that are doing all this damage. Poland, Romania, and Germany are among the European nations with open orders for Patriot systems still to be delivered. Spain also has an open order for Patriot launchers, while a coalition of NATO states in January placed an order for 1,000 Patriot missiles. Spain, Greece, and Romania have Patriots in their arsenals, but have so far declined to authorize transfers to launch systems to Ukraine. Poland has said its Patriots are protecting the infrastructure used to ship Western weaponry across its border into Ukraine, and thus are already deployed to help protect the war-torn country. In addition, Italy said this month it would send Kiev a second SAMP-T air defense system, a European-made alternative to the Patriot. US and Ukrainian officials did not immediately respond to requests for comment. So, yeah, it's the most advanced air defense system in the world. Zelensky said it's the most effective air defense system in the world today, capable of shooting down Russian missiles, including ballistic ones. So, yeah, I'm just seeing if there's anything else that's worth mentioning from the article. Quote, addressing the ammunition shortfalls and coverage gaps in Ukraine's air defense is essential for the country to defend critical infrastructure and no less important than stabilizing the front line, said Michael Kaufman, a senior fellow in the Russia and Eurasia program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Quote, Russian strikes have significantly damaged Ukraine's non-nuclear power generation capacity, and Russian drones are increasingly able to target Ukrainian positions behind the front lines because of a lack of air defense coverage. Although I would think, well, yes, so they can target with missiles. I think there also needs to be a really big issue on those drones much closer to the front lines, but still the medium range. But anyway, that's another discussion. Ukraine is now suffering from the most destructive form of Russia's vision of energy as a weapon, said Zelensky. So this is really good news, really, really strong news to hear. And all we're waiting for are the actual orders for Ukraine. Now, they may have taken place. Raytheon may well have, or RTX may already have those orders. We just don't know formally about it. But yeah, definitely that's the next step along that journey. Right. This is another really significant piece of news. So South Korea will review the issue of supplying weapons to Ukraine. Yonhap, that's a South Korean media source, said with reference to the president's representative. Okay, so I have said for a long time that I've been surprised that South Korea have been sitting by while North Korea provide arms to Russia. Now you have seen Putin in Pyongyang for 2 days. It's no coincidence that South Korea is saying this. And this is bloody important. Right? South Korea are at war with North Korea and have been for an awful long time. So as a result, they have a massive arms industry that consistently makes stuff. Right, so they had moved previously from outside the top 10 to, I think in 2022, they were 8th biggest military exporter in the world, and now they're moving up. I don't know if they're like 5th now or something. So South Korea are a really big player in the international arms market. They can make things quickly. They can mobilize their industry accordingly. These are really potentially really strong sources and supporters of Ukraine and Ukrainian procurement. Really, really big news, and I hope that gets changed soon. And because previously they've given, say, 300,000 shells to the US or however many it was as a backfill, so the US then send their shells to Ukraine, and that was a kind of indirect way of supporting Ukraine. But it essentially, the direct procurement would be much more useful. Really, really strong news there. Now, German aid to Ukraine, says German media Hartpunkt, which specializes in security and defense policy, reports that the German government is currently considering equipping Ukraine with a new NOMADS air defense system. NOMADS is a Norwegian air defense system which consists of a SHORAD, so that's short-range air defense module, mounted on an ACSV G5, which is manufactured by FFG in Germany. However, it is also reported that important components made abroad will be replaced by German-made components if only Germany participates in the financing. So in other words, Germany are toying with the idea of providing a new air defense system for Ukraine, or by new I mean one that hasn't been provided so far, and saying, look, you guys can help finance this. If you make components in your own country, that'd be great. If you don't help finance it, we'll just replace those components with our own components. So there you go. I'm going to talk a little bit about Germany, about France, and about the US actually at the end of this video in terms of the political wins and military support. Okay, now The Guardian reports it's all lining up. Plan for Ukraine to finally start using F-16 jets this summer. There's been all this talk about when they're actually going to get military, when they're going to get these F-16s, but it seems like it might be sooner rather than later. So, at a military base in the rural south of the Netherlands, General Arnoud Stolman, a Dutch Air Force commander, said he expected that at some point during this summer, F-16 fighter jets would finally take to the skies over Ukraine. Not just delivery, but take to the skies. Quote, around the summertime, it's all lining up, he said, speaking in front of 2 disused F-16s inside a hangar at a base where a recent program to train Ukrainian Air Force instructors in maintenance for the jets had come to a close. Belgium, Denmark and Netherlands and Norway. So that's interesting. So first of all, that's the maintenance crews have finished their training. That's what we can draw from that. Belgium, Denmark and Netherlands and Norway have pledged to provide Ukraine with about 80 US-made F-16s. Between them, hardware that the Ukrainian Air Force has been asking for more than a year, but the program to get the planes in the air has been hit by delays in delivery and training. I think a lot of the delays have been in terms of infrastructure in Ukraine, as well as training of not just the pilots, of course, it's the maintenance and logistics and whatnot. Romania is also helping out a lot as well, it has to be said. General said the training regimen for pilots and ground staff to operate the aircraft was not simple. I'm going to belabor this point. Quote, it's not just the pilots who need training. Technicians and maintainers also require thorough instruction. We're providing comprehensive support training to ensure that they can effectively maintain the aircraft, so everything has to come together, he said. the defense minister said that the first deliveries of aircraft in Ukraine should take place in the summer and pushed back against criticism over delays amid reports that Kyiv has been frustrated at the pace of pilot training. Quote, I completely understand the Ukrainian position. They want to do this as fast as possible. We are doing the project as fast as we can. We are really stretching our capacity, Ollongren, so that's the Dutch defense minister said. The F-16s are really much more complicated than the systems the Ukrainian Air Force were using so far. You cannot just hop over several steps. You have to take every step of the process, but also we want to deliver them as quickly as possible, she added. I think this is a good time to bring in the Ward Carroll interview of Justin Bronk. He's interviewed him again, and this is perfectly aligns with what we're talking about here. Now, I'm not trying to get the US off the hook for not doing enough training, but you've got to remember the F-16 coalition was a European coalition. It wasn't the Americans that were spearheading the F-16 provision for Ukraine. So that's worth knowing as well.
Has or hasn't been, starting with the F-16. So where are we with their training track? Do they have F-16s in theater yet? And if so, how effective are they, and will they ultimately be any form of a game changer going forward?
So Ukraine has pilots training on F-16, the vast majority in Europe, and it is worth stating, especially given that a lot of the narratives in the US at the moment about, the US expected to do it all, why aren't the Europeans doing things? Worth noting that all the F-16s that are being donated are European F-16s. So it's Dutch, Danish, Belgian, Norwegian. And the vast majority of that training is being done in Romania and in Denmark.
And that turned out to be what, 200 airframes, sort of more or less?
A little above 80, definitely committed at the moment for a potential requirement of around 200 at some point in the sort of medium term. So obviously there's significant sensitivities around details on where the training is. There have been public statements, so the Danish Minister of Defense, I believe, or one of a senior Danish politician recently, a couple of weeks ago, said that F-16s should be in Ukraine next month. My personal take is that would be a bit premature, as ever, not because the pilots can't fly them, but because learning the tactics required to be effective with them, which are absolutely not the tactics that Ukraine's combat experienced pilots are used to with MiG-29 and Sukhoi 27, takes a lot more time than learning to fly the jet, especially for element leads, so 2-ship leads, let alone 4-ship leads. These are tactics that Ukrainian Air Force pilots have never flown, the Ukrainian Air Force has never used. And it's almost harder to train combat experienced pilots who have lots and lots of time on MiG-29 or Sukhoi 27, those tactics, than it is to train people from scratch.
This is a really important point he's about to make. So the TLDR is that taking experienced Ukrainian pilots and retraining them on F-16s is more difficult than taking newbies, but taking newbies is much slower. Like you have to teach them how to fly first, and then you put them through learning to fly on the F-16s. That is what's happening. So that's where you're getting the people going to the UK, then to France, and then F-16s and Mirages. But that's like a 2-year thing, or however long it's going to take. Training these people that are used to MiGs and Sukhois on F-16s is problematic, and he details this.
And that's a thing that's a feature that was found in every Air Force that transferred from former Warsaw Pact types to F-16. Poland, for example, when they were converting from MiG-29 and other Soviet legacy fighters to F-16, they sent the best MiG-29 sort of weapons instructor equivalent to the first kind of F-16 conversion course in the States, and he failed. They sent the second best, and he failed. And then they kind of caught on that probably the bulk of their F-16 crews would have to be new guys trained from scratch.
They failed because there's so much information in the cockpit because of the autonomy.
It basically comes down to the way that former Soviet Air Forces and Air Force doctrine employs aircraft. So GCI based. A lot of the Soviet MiG-29 and Sukhoi 27 sort of in-cockpit practice revolves around being tasked by a ground-based commander to take off and fly to a certain point at particular altitude points on a particular frequency, and at certain points literally press buttons to switch the radar through different steps of different modes to be talked on to the lock, and then individual weapon release being authorized from the ground. It's a completely different way of conceiving of and teaching people how to operate combat aircraft to in the US to in any Western system where, as you say, there's a lot more cockpit in cockpit autonomy that is not just in the cockpit. It goes through mission planning, the way that we conceive of and kind of execute tactics as part of mission planning, and then through the sorties themselves, debriefing. And we've built an entire weapons and aircraft and sensor and data link kind of architecture around our tactics. And it's very difficult to take people who have lots and lots of time in one system and transition them successfully to the other. Partly because, yes, of course, they can try and rehearse it, and they can try and understand the theory and then go through it in sims and even in real life. But the moment you put them under pressure, they tend to revert to what they know. Especially, the more time people have in cockpit in one system, the harder it generally is to convert them. All of which means that at a tactical level, it would be astonishing if Ukrainian pilots, however skilled and however combat experienced and brave and committed they are on their MiG-29 and Sukhoi 27s, it would be fairly astonishing if they were anywhere close to the proficiency levels that we would expect from a 2-ship lead, let alone a 4-ship lead, in a standard NATO, particularly American F-16 unit. Especially since a lot of the course will probably have been truncated a bit to speed things up. And at the same time, the threat environment, in terms of the surface-to-air and the air-to-air threat environment, is not one that we would deploy F-16 into from a NATO point of view. We would not see that platform, even with all the US weapons, as a suitable platform to kind of take the lead in that sort of threat environment. It would play a part in a much larger composite air operation with 5th gen forward and lots of standoff and lots of EW enablement and all sorts of suppressive weapon effects. And it would certainly play a useful part in that. But F-16 on its own into that threat environment, this is a jet that was designed in the 70s. It's asking a lot. And it's not to say that it can't be useful. My point is just to reinforce the level of tactical proficiency, not just as individual pilots, but as formations, that they will need to be really effective in that environment is high. So training the pilots, the more time, the better. One of the big problems Ukrainians found, and we found training Ukrainians for last year's counteroffensive, was that a lot of the equipment was provided too late to give them more than a couple of months of training on things like Abrams, Leopard. And funny old thing, it's just not enough time to train people to do complex maneuver operations as part of a larger force, in combined arms, against those sort of defense lines. And the training in Ukrainian analysis is absolutely the same as Western analysis. The training failed. It was not good enough because we didn't have time. And the training you need to operate a tank as part of a maneuver formation, combined arms with infantry and artillery, is, it's complicated, but it's nowhere close to, 4-ship F-16 tactics in a combined ground and air-based threat mess. So yeah, the longer they can train for, the better. Obviously, Ukraine has needs that are very urgent now, but a lot of those needs are not ones that F-16 is ideally placed to respond to. And in fact, deployment of F-16 forward will further increase pressure on Ukraine's ground-based air defenses, which are currently one of its biggest sort of priorities is trying to address shortfalls in not just number of launchers, but critically ammunition for ground-based air defenses. If you put F-16 in country, if you don't have lots and lots of locations prepped for it, you're going to have to put a lot of air defense around it to stop the Russians smashing it on the ground as soon as they figure out where it is.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, but that then goes back to the importance of this article or the content of this article, that US is to redirect Patriot air defense orders. You need Patriots all over Ukraine to enable the F-16s. You need F-16 pilots to get much longer training than they'll probably be given. You need them to be able to train in groups of twos and fours, not just alone. They're used to flying alone broadly, or in pairs, but not doing the same kind of tactics that you would expect NATO pilots to do with their MiGs and Sukhois. Now they need to fly in a completely different system using completely different tactics. Now NATO sets up its entire design of its equipment to fit in with the doctrine and the tactics that it uses. And so flipping from Sukhois and MiGs to a system that requires an entirely different doctrine is massively challenging. You can't just get a bunch of pilots, whack them through pilot training, say, right, you're ready to go. And then say, I mean, Ukraine is obviously going to be saying, we need this done quicker, because they need everything now. But the reality is the US can't just go, well, we factored in 12. Okay, that's not enough. Here's 36 places. Like, that's tripling the amount of instructors you'd need, the amount of airframes you'd need, the logistics, so on and so forth. It's just hugely, hugely challenging. Anyway, I just thought that would be important to share with you. As it says here, Ukraine's been waiting for months to use these airframes. So an aviation expert and former Ukrainian military pilot said, quote, "The Russians will be forced to change their tactics. We will be able to target airplanes and missiles more effectively, and it will be really difficult for them to keep using carb-guided air bombs, which they need to launch from 50 to 70 kilometers away." So the good news, I mean, the hopeful scenario is that this will stop the Russian Air Force being able to use those carb bombs so extensively, particularly up in the north at the moment, also in the east, also in the south and along the Dnipro River. But it's going to be about air defense systems as well as these pilots being trained. Mikhailo Podolyak, an aide to Zelensky, said last month, against these, even air defense systems are not so useful, only aviation. The F-16 has a longer range than Russian MiG and Su planes. The problem is the Russian planes also have long air-to-air reach too, in fact longer than the F-16s arguably. And so yes, there will be an improvement on the Soviet era stuff that the Ukrainians have, but it still won't necessarily overcome the threats from the Russian planes. So yeah, lots to be discussed in this article. I'll move on now, but I'll actually stay in the same subject. It goes on to talk about okay, well, it doesn't matter. Let's move on to just a couple of comments on training of the pilots. And someone here says, Daryl here, agreeing with what I was saying yesterday, as a former flight instructor in the RCF-AF, so I presume that's the Royal Canadian Air Force, it takes time and lots of resources to expand a training program to increase the output of pilots and ground crew. Could it have been done sooner? Yes. But considering when the decision was made to provide the F-16s, things are moving fairly fast if in fact they get the aircraft this summer. And then John Oliver adds a really big comment here. We'll just fly through this. What people don't understand is that the US fighter program is a tradition that is decades old. Not just anyone from the Air Force can apply. A lot of these men and women started training in high school and or college in ROTC training. You have to have a bachelor's degree to become an officer. You have to be an officer to even attempt to become a pilot. X amount of classes begin each year. Thousands apply. Only a fraction are accepted. If you throw that off, you are throwing off the entire Air Force careers of people who can only be pilots for a set length of time, age requirements, health, etc. And people act like this is just F-16 training and adding some Ukrainian pilots in with them. It's not. It starts with education, officer training, basic pilot training, advanced fighter training, then moves on to craft-specific training. Ukrainian pilots are added into fighter training basics, advanced, and then specific craft training. It's not just US pilots, it's pilots from around the world for every country that the US exports jets to, and for each type of jet exported, A-10, F-15, F-16, F-A-18, F-22, F-35, etc., etc. They all start together and work their way up through, up until they split up for specifics to their craft. The more Ukrainian pilots you throw in, the more it throws off the entire schedule, the more resentment it can create with pilots all over who have been there since the beginning, not coming in the middle, and even worse, the people who didn't get selected, their lifelong dream and career halted to a point. Yes, some understanding for the situation should exist, and some give and take have been created already. Okay. In other words, I'm sort of reacting to this, Biden's just trying to delay the Ukrainian F-16s because he wants to kill Ukrainians, or whatever nonsense we hear. And I showed you a couple of those opinions. Trent Telenko, David D. These people that should know better. I wouldn't over-politicize this. This will be about the practicalities of throwing an absolute bucket load of Ukrainian pilots into a really, really complicated process. And then to blame the president of the USA for the inability to do this, like he does the scheduling for fricking F-16 pilot training. I mean, come on, let's be realistic about this. And again, I'm not trying to get Biden off the hook. More needs to be done, but it's just really difficult, right? Another thing is, I doubt Ukraine sees more than 10 F-16s in country this year. They don't have the infrastructure in place. They don't have the supply chain to keep them maintained. They don't have shelters in place to protect them. They will be Russia's #1 targets. Yep, true. For strategic reasons and for propaganda purposes, this is normally a 3 to 5 year process in a country at peace. This is why some of us advocated for F-16 since day one of the invasion. They were skipping so much already to speed up this process. Plus, quite a few of the promised jets are contingent on when that country receives their F-35s that are replacing the F-16s they are giving. Some of them are still not scheduled to receive the F-35s for another 4 to 6 years, and some will be given ahead of time once just a part of the fleet is replaced. But the 80 to 90 promises over the course of several years, not when Ukraine is ready, and these jets will mean nothing without keeping them secure, operating them with a SAM net, having a surface-to-air missile net, and having areas for them to take off and land. Again, a study was done several years ago of bases capable of operating F-16s. There were only 3 in Ukraine, and unfortunately all 3 were named publicly, so Russia already has their target area zeroed in quite a bit. There are reports that the first jets won't see Ukraine until at least October, and it will be no more than 10 this year. Back to pilots, train them right. They are already changing to Western aircraft within a 5-year training cycle and whittling it down to a few months. Too much risk of mistakes, lack of experience, familiarization with the new aircraft, especially when for now there are a finite number of jets being given in the middle of a war, and that being with that being the hands-on experience straight to combat. Regular people can't just jump into a race car and go win a race, nor drive around the track, not avoid a wreck, but draft rub pass, know when and where on the track to let off the throttle to begin a turn. You're asking pilots to jump into an F-16 and go win, because if they don't, they are potentially dead and the jet is gone. I see a little of the point of blaming Biden. He has delayed on every weapon system requested and eventually given, just setting everything back. He did for a long time on the F-16s. Ukraine doesn't need F-16s. We are not giving on and on until other countries come forward to give theirs, and other countries began discussing pilot training, and the whole world waited and watched the US, since we still had to give permission since they were US exports. Thankfully, we didn't just say yes and sit back and watch. We are actually taking an active role in training, arming, supplying future aircraft. As you said, Biden doesn't know everything. He has advisors to listen to, like Sullivan, who I actually do think is a problem. Whether he is actually worried about the escalation with Russia, not going to war with them, what might happen if they collapse, or whether he's just trying to cover Biden's ass in case something goes wrong, then Biden can have at least some kind of deniability, or the opposite, someone to blame for not doing stuff sooner, etc., etc. But he is the one who advises Biden on all of this, and the one who directly below the president has the most knowledge of the situation, equipment, weapons, etc. Okay, it's a really long comment, and thanks so much to John Oliver for providing that. And I broadly agree with everything there. And I think if you're going to blame anyone, then go down to that level of expertise below that, along with, so they would be saying to the US Air Force, we need to train Ukrainian pilots, and the US Air Force say, okay, we can do 12. You could blame the US Air Force for not trying harder to give more, or the group up here for not giving them enough pressure to provide. That seems to be happening now, but it's all about information coming up and down and coming in from Ukraine. And so to just blame this one person at the top is too simplistic, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Russia will pay for Ukraine's defence, says the British ambassador to Ukraine, Martin Harris. The decision to use frozen Russian assets is just the first step, and confiscation of all assets should follow. Quote, through the use of profits on Russian assets, we can ensure loans for Ukraine worth $50 billion. This means Russia will pay for Ukraine's defense, he said. The head of KSF, Arseny Yatsenyuk, emphasized with this decision, G7 showed Putin that they are ready to keep Russian assets arrested for decades, or frozen for decades, as it takes at least 10 years to accumulate $50 billion. That they won't step back and will support Ukraine as long as it takes for Ukraine to prevail. So the G7's been strong on that. Good news there. Now, the US confirms authorization for Ukrainian armed forces to strike Russian military positions just inside Russia near Kharkiv and Sumy Oblast. Yesterday, some people on my threads were saying Ukraine's been given permission to shoot anywhere inside Russia with short-range munitions, and actually that's not, doesn't seem to be true. They've been given explicit permission, I think Jake Sullivan said this, inside Kharkiv and Sumy only, with US provided weapons. That's better than not, but that's far, far short. And again, if you want to blame anyone, I think it's Jake Sullivan and the very overly cautious approach to using weaponry inside Russia. French, now this is getting on to my super worry. Okay, this is where we're going to finish. French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal did not rule out cutting military aid to Ukraine if the far right wins the parliamentary elections. Quote, the next step after that, if the Rassemblement National accepts it, it will be the end of a significant part of the support for Ukraine, he emphasised. Now, there's about, 522 communes, districts in France that are voting in the parliamentary election. And I think Macron's centrists are going to get 41, according to polling. You might get an absolute decimation of the centrists with the far-right Rassemblement National. And I think Les Républicains, the centre-right, the equivalent to like the Conservative Party in the UK, are going to get absolutely pasted as well. So I think you're going to have a far-right, and then you're going to get this leftist coalition. But the problem with the leftist coalition is you've got some far-left in there who are anti-aid to Ukraine as well. Like Mélenchon, who is a big left leader, is a bit pro-Russia, I think. So you're going to get the centre and centre-right squeezed out, and you will get the far-right and the left reacting against the far-right, coalescing, but it will have like the French communists and the French who are a thing, and other French far to the left that might get some success. So the whole parliamentary election might look like the extremes. Okay, and this is not good for continued aid to Ukraine. And I'm worried about this in the US with MAGA Trumpism. I'm worried about this in Germany with the talk about a collapse of the Rainbow Coalition, which is a leftist, centre-left coalition in Germany, who have been really strongly in support of Ukraine as the AfDs come along, and they are overtly pro-Russian. I am super worried. Yes, the European elections have shown a kind of, there was some movement at the far right, but the centre or the centre right held ground there. But I am genuinely worried that big players in Europe are looking to move domestically towards being pro-Russian, and that's a challenge for support to Ukraine. Right, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I'm going to leave you playing out. You can stop the video now if you want, but here's a video. I cringe when I hear my name. Like, no one likes hearing their name in this kind of way. It's a bit like, oh, it's about me. But I really like the song, right? And I like the way that he's put the lyrics together. So this is one of my viewers who's created using AI. So it's AI singing. I think he's done the lyrics, though. And the lyrics are pretty cool, other than the use of my name and being a bit like praising of me. And I feel uncomfortable with that. But this is really cool. And look how far AI has come. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with this song playing out.
When the world's in turmoil and truth is hard to find, Jonathan Pierce is the one who eases our minds. On ATP Geopolitics, he breaks it down so clear, from the heart of Ukraine to the headlines we hear. Jonathan Pierce with dates on the line, bringing us the news in these uncertain times. on our side. From his home in the UK to the front lines he did go, to bring us first-hand stories, the truths we need to know. With every new development, he's there to explain the struggles and the triumphs, the losses and the gains. Jonathan Pierce with updates on the line, bringing us the news in these uncertain times. From Kyiv to the front lines, he's our trusted guide. In the world of geopolitics, he's on our side. From his home in the UK to the front lines he did go, to bring us first-hand stories, the truths we need to know. With every new development, he's there to explain the struggles and the triumphs, the losses and the gains. In the chaos of conflict, he finds the truth and light, breaking through the noise with clarity and insight. His channel is a lifeline for those who seek to know
I like this line.
the stories behind the stories, the facts that make us
I like that.
grow.
I like that.
Jonathan Pierce with updates on the line, bringing us the news in these uncertain times. From Kyiv to the front lines, he's our trusted guide. In the world of geopolitics, he's on our side. So tune into ATP for the latest and the best. Jonathan Pierce brings the news, he's a cut above the rest. With each and every update, he keeps us all aligned. In the shifting world of geopolitics, he brings us peace of mind. Slaughter Ukraine, we stand with you today. With Jonathan Pierce, the truth will find its way. When the chaos of conflict, he finds the truth and light.
Freaking love that. I mean, it is a bit cringe with my name, but like musically, and to think AI has done that, but thank you so much to Rizzard's World. And actually JR's done a song as well, which I'll play out on a video tomorrow. So it's like music week this week. Thanks guys, take care, speak soon, toodle pips.